Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This is Difference Maker coming to you live from the Dallas Cowboy Studio / office. Real name Karsten Miller. Going to talk about hermeneutics today. I am going to give you some just basic information that you need. This is for you teachers of the word. You need to know good hermeneutics. I'm going to take this from a hermeneutics course that I have looked at, and some of the books and quotations come from Basic Bible Interpretation by Roy B. Zuck, How to Interpret the Bible for Yourself by Richard Mayhew, and Knowing Scripture by R.C. Sproul. Basically, this is like an introduction to hermeneutics with the history of interpretation, the principles of proper interpretation, and they'll give you some reasons to study the Bible and some exegetical questions. So this part of the Bible studies that I do will talk about hermeneutics. Now, let's start with what is hermeneutics. Now, the origin of the term. The word hermeneutic is said to have had its origin in the name Hermes, the Greek god who served as a messenger for the gods. The English word hermeneutics comes from the Greek verb hermeneuo and from the noun hermeneia. These words are ultimately sourced back to Hermes, the Greek mythological god who brought the message of the gods to the mortals. He was responsible for communicating what was beyond human understanding into a form that intelligence could grasp. He was also known as the god of science, invention, speech, writing, literature, and eloquence. He was the messenger or interpreter of the gods, and particularly of his father Zeus. Thus the verb came to refer as bringing someone to understanding of something in his language, thus explanation, or to refer to bringing someone to understanding of something, or in another language, thus translation. The English word interpret is used at times to mean explain or at other times translate. In its 19 usages, both nouns and verbs in the New Testament, it is more frequently used in the latter sense, as the following illustrates. Now, in the Old Testament, the Bible uses the concept of interpretation in a different way. The Old Testament generally uses the concept in reference to the interpretation of dreams, and that's from Ram. In the New Testament uses 5 forms of the basic meaning of translate. So, one of those meanings is explanation. If you look in Luke chapter 24, verse 27, it says, "And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them the things concerning himself in all the scriptures." The second way that is used in the New Testament is translation. Now, some of the nouns, remember I said hermeneia. In 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 10, the interpretation of tongues. In 1 Corinthians 14, verse 26, also an interpretation. Hermeneutics, in 1 Corinthians 14, verse 28, it is if there is no interpreter. Now, the noun exegesis does not occur in the New Testament, and that's taken from Vines. Now let's look at some of the verbs and how this, when dealing with hermeneutics here. The verb form, meaning to lead out, is found in John chapter 1, verse 18, where it says that Christ exegeted the Father to man. This means that Jesus revealed and explained the Father and his will to the human race, also taken from Vines. So we have, first the word hermeneuo, where you see in John chapter 1, verse 42, where Cephas which is translated means Peter. You also see in John chapter 9, verse 7, verse Siliom, which is translated since. You see what I'm saying here? Hebrews 7, verse 2, by translation, King of Righteousness. Number 2, the transliteration Hermenio, and I'm not very good at pronouncing the Greek. I gotta work on that. But Acts chapter 9, verse 36, where it says Tabitha, which is translated Dorcas, which is called Dorcas. 1 Corinthians 12, verse 30, 1 Corinthians 14, verse 5, 1 Corinthians 14, verse 13, and verse 27. It's also another translated word, which translation means, and you can find that in Matthew chapter 1, verse 23, where it talks about Emmanuel, which translated means God with us. Also Mark chapter 5, verse 41, Mark 15, verse 22, and verse 34, where it says Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which is translated. See? So, the biblical definition of hermeneutics. Hermeneutics is the science and art of biblical interpretation. It is a science because it is guided by rules with a system, and it is an art because the application of the rules is by skill and not by mechanical imitation. That's taken from The Protestant by Ram. Here again, Ram is talking about the same thing on page 11, where he says hermeneutics is a science in that it can determine certain principles for discovering the meaning of a document. It is also an art because the principles or rules can never be applied mechanically but involve the skill of the interpreter. Now, some of this may sound boring going through this, but these are things that you need to know. You need to know what hermeneutics is. Any good Bible teacher that's teaching sound doctrine should be able to tell you what hermeneutics is, why he uses it. You have preachers and teachers who God has not called, and guarantee you they use bad hermeneutics. They use bad hermeneutics. Here, listen to this, a quote from Thomas where it says, hermeneutics is the science of interpretation. It is that branch of theology which defines the laws applied by exegesis. It determines the rules which are legitimate in the interpretive process and those which are not. Considerable confusion has been introduced into modern day discussions of hermeneutics. Any effort to incorporate anything of an subjective nature or to insist that objective interpretation is impossible must be soundly repudiated. The science that teaches us the principles, laws, and methods of interpretation. So, the question that can come out, okay, we speaking about hermeneutics, and it's the science of an art of biblical interpretation. What is the difference between hermeneutics and exegesis? Okay, well, let's discuss that a little bit. Hermeneutics is a set of principles. Exegesis is an implementation of valid interpretive principles. Here it is. Meaning is the truth intention of the author. Interpretation is an understanding of the truth intention of the author. Did you get it? I'll say it again. Meaning is the truth intention of the author. Interpretation is an understanding of the truth intention of the author. Exegesis is the actual interpretation of the Bible, and hermeneutics consists of the principles by which the meaning is determined.